Alright, hi everybody, we are now in Maya. I thought I'd do this first beginner tutorial as a demonstration, not a tutorial. So this is not a follow-through tutorial, this is just a demonstration. Mind my kids in the background. This is just a demonstration to show you how we can model this little character here that we'll be animating in the next few tutorials. I thought what we're going to do is go through this really slowly as a beginner tutorial. We're going to learn Maya from scratch. But I thought I'd come in and just demo sort of a full speed how I would do it with some hotkeys, and it's not really a follow-on tutorial unless you're pretty with it with ZooTools. Just to show you about Maya and what it does, and a little bit of an introduction into the program and to see how maybe a professional would use it. So we're going to come in here. I'll just come to the front view. Don't worry about hotkeys and following this along just yet. I'm switching off the grid there. We're just going to create this little guy, light him, and create a little image. So let's go for it. So I'm just in the front view here, going to come in and create a sphere. Now on my hotkeys, I keep them quite not very dense, but you can put up the things. I'm hitting T there. That's now 36, and we'll make this quite a lot more divisions than 24. You can also type those in over there. This is the same thing. Now we're going to come in and create a cube. Same thing, I'm moving that up and to here. So this is just sort of showing you what Maya does in a way. Just putting that cube kind of there in the front view and there. And we can come back to the perspective view and see that we've now got, if we can zoom in on this, we've just built a sphere and a cube. And it looks like that. Now if we come to the side view here, we can now scale this. So I've got sort of these manipulators that I can widget and move these around, scale and position and rotate objects. If I am to select all the edges there, I can bevel this guy, come to the front view, and now we can put the segments up to, like, I can just do that sort of a thing, or just type 8, probably easier in my case, and we can see that now. Now I can come back and I can scale this up a little bit more and just reposition it so it fits a little bit nicer, like that. Keep in mind, this I am going to redo this tutorial, so I'll do this a lot better for the official page, but I'm just sort of going to rocket through this for these tutes to see how we go. So now I'm just building a little arm with a cylinder. So I've just built a cylinder with the hotkeys. I'm going to roughly put that in place there, make that a bit bigger all the way to the end there. Now when we animate this, we'll have to add a little ball onto the end and stuff, but for now it's going to make it something like that. What do we want? 24. 36, so just go for a lot. Yeah, there. And we can do the same sort of thing here, bevel, and type in 8. Just go to that same front view, check that to see that it matches, which it does. And we're in a pretty good place. I don't know if I undid that face. Yeah, I've got to remove that face again. That's in the back inside of the model. So a face is like one of those guys, and we'll talk about that later. Vertices are these little points, and edges are these guys. I'm using a lot of hotkeys here, which when you're starting out, you do the right clicks. Let's go duplicate, and we'll rotate this guy around. So just now duplicating that down. Now I'm using, everything in ZooTools, which is our plugin. But when I do the tute properly, we'll learn how to do this without the plugin. So we've got that. Now we need some eyes. So I'm just going to create a little eye and just place it roughly. Hold down J and we can snap like this. Let's come in here and now make that something like 24. Don't need quite as many divisions now that we're on these eyes. And from the side view, we can move that forward into the position that it should be in. Now I've done sort of like these 3 objects here that can be mirrored. Let's rename them first, and we'll just call these heads. So this is the outliner over here. I'm just going to rename the objects to what they are. This will help us in the next step if you're using our plugin at least. And we've got our eye there. So now I can grab these 3 guys here, which need to be mirrored, and just hit the hotkey, and that will mirror them. And then we can select them all and then hit another hotkey, and then now they're all named correctly and mirrored. So that's nice. Now the last part is the tricky part. It's the hat. It's on this little bit of an angle. Everything else is really easy to model. So I'm just going to use the head, and we'll rename that to be hat. And then we'll come in here, and I want to sort of like come in and rotate that sideways and just sort of measure how big it is. I know how I did model this, so I know that it is a sphere without anything else fancy, too fancy going on. And then we can just sort of rotate it up into position like that in the front view. And just check that in some other views. So we've also got a top view. You can see that there. Roll that into position. And then the right view. That'll like roughly get it right. And we've got something like that. We can make that a tiny bit bigger or just rotate it a bit better. Doesn't have to be exactly correct. So there we go. We've got a little hat. Now there's a little like pom-pom on the top, which is this little cylinder thing. So I'm just going to hit my hotkeys and create another one. Now what that's done is create a cylinder in the middle here. And I can move that up and scale it. And you can see, and we're going to put quite a few divisions on this as normal, put 24 or something on it. I want to grab all the vertices on the bottom and sort of punch them in because we're sort of making a little bit of a, I don't know, a cone shape, I guess you could say. And then I actually want to delete that face at the bottom, which is this polygon that sits at the bottom there. You can see it highlighted. I'll talk about that more in the long shoot. And we can grab this top guy here. Now, before I do that, I want to, position this. So let's go to the top view. And you can see I'm sort of looking through, this is called wireframe mode. Then looking through the model, just want to get that roughly placed. In the front view, you can see switching into world space, so that these manipulators just work correctly. Roughly about there, we can make that a bit bigger. And then from the side view as well, sort of grab that and maybe make it a little bit smaller. And we're roughly in the ballpark of what that should look like. And last step is we'll just come in and do a little thing, mind the planes in the background. I'm just going to cruise through this shoot. I mean, put a few things in there, maybe 6 this time is enough. Like that. So now that we've done that, we've modeled our character. There it is. Now it doesn't look super great yet. It just looks like this gray thing. So this is where we can do a lot more things. Now just on that, I did create a couple of things. So we'll just make that hat appendage. First thing is we're going to come through and just finish off this so we can group them. That's Control G, and then we'll call this man like that. And we can open that up. Now in ZooTools, we do have like this rename tool. And this is just a nice handy tool where you can select everything and go automatic suffix. That just puts the geo and stuff. That's a very Maya-centric thing, like that. And now we want to put some colors and things on this. So I'm just going to create a ground plane like that. So now we have a floor for this guy. Get a bit bigger. And we want to put some colors on him. So I'm going to do this with the ZooTools stuff, but we're going to do this, using the attribute editor in the normal Maya way in the full shoot. And we want to come in and we want to grab a color. So I'm just going to come in with the eye picker here and select something like that. Now, before we do that, we do need to select the shader. So I'll select all these guys here. We need to create a shader. So standard surface Maya, create, and we'll come in now and select that. Now there's going to be a problem here, and you see that the color does not match at all. Now this has got to do with a fair bit of stuff. It's like almost a 40-minute tutorial just talking about color space and how 3D colors are quite different, quite complicated, and Maya is now doing a lot of things. So there's a bit of a talk here about this, but just bear with me. You see those colors are quite drastically different. So we've got a tool here that just a one-click button called the Fixed Viewport tool, and we just hit the create and reparent light when we're in the perspective window, and that will create a little light rig for us that will fix all our colors so that everything looks good. Now it's still a little bit dark, but I'll show you what's going on. Now our colors are sort of calibrated to the viewport and it's pretty decent, and there's a bit more to this tool, but I'm just going to leave it at that there. Now you will see by default that the lights are coming up like that, so I'm just going to turn them off like that. And now you can see we've got this little rig. We've got shadows that we can move around. You can move around some of these controls and get different reflective properties on the object. But we just want to keep going. So I'm going to come back to this shader builder here. Select this guy here, and we'll just, now the colors are out a little bit. That's because we're in this ACES color workflow, which I'll talk about in a later tutorial. But we can come in here, and I just want to make that full bright and make that 0.8. Like that. And I've done this before, so I'm just going to go 255 to get that color that I wanted. Now that is the same color, just the lights are a bit brighter, and we're going to do that in a second. We'll see. And now what I want to do is I want to make this a little bit shiny. So these are like material properties. So we've got the color of the character, but we've also got like how shiny it is. So you can see that we can make it really shiny. or by switching the specular color up and then the roughness down. And you can see that we're starting to see the reflection, which is also in this chrome ball. So if I'm going to move that around, you can see that reflection of the city, these little buildings in the background there in the viewport. But here we want to make this guy quite rough, make it quite a rough surface, like around 0.5-ish. Type that in. And then we want to make a couple more shaders. So we're going to make the eyes, and we'll go create. Now you can rename them here and go eyes, and then make that quite dark. You'll see it goes dark quite quickly, and we'll bring that up, and we'll make this one less rough, so it's going to be shiny. So it's not rough, it's going to be shiny in the viewport, and this is going to make it a little bit more of this sort of what we call a specular highlight in the eyes. And these guys here, we're going to create another one, and we'll make that one like the hat. Same thing, make it quite dark. Maybe not quite as dark. You see the color difference. That's because we've got a grade on, which is called this ASUS thing here. And bring that right up. Now this one, this hat, we can make it really, really rough. So like up around, 0.75. And that starts making it look a little bit more like material. You can go higher than that too, at 0.8 maybe. And we can see now our little man's looking quite a lot better. Still not looking as good as this guy here in the background, but you can see now we've got that. We can move around the light again, see all this, and we're generally in a pretty good place. So that's kind of done. Now would be a good time to save the tutorial. So I'll just go File, Save Scene here. Ignore this stuff. I'm just sort of doing this. So I'll say test shoot 02 for me, but you would save the shoot properly, as we'll do properly later. Now that we've got that here, we want to light this with what's called ray trace colors. So the viewport is like almost like a game engine. It reacts really quick and fast, but it doesn't look like totally photoreal. So what we want to do is we want to create a really photoreal render here. And just before I do that, I've got one thing. I'm going to make this quite large, like 1,000. And we're going to grab this guy and pull it up. So I'm just holding Shift and pulling that up to make that. And then we can do the same thing that we used before. Control B for me is bevel. And then we can really up those segments. And I'm going to make that a sub-D surface too. So a really nice smooth sort of thing there. This is called a cyc. So a cyc is like a little stage that gives you this infinite lighting look. And we'll see what this looks like in a second. So it's going to come here and call that ground. And we'll just, instead of opening up the rename tool, we'll just go Geo, because that is Geo. And now back in our shaders, we'll just create a new shader here and make it gray. It's actually quite a light gray, but let's go with that. Okay, we can turn off this little gizmo here in Zootools just by clicking those guys. And we can remove the image planes now. We don't really need them, so we can turn those off now that we've modeled the character. So now what we want to do is start to light this with the ray traced lights. So there's two different modes and they look quite different. So we'll see this in a second. Now I'm just going to come up and go to the Fix Viewport tool. That little gizmo that we created, I just want to remove it now because we're moving from viewport lighting into the correct end final result lighting, which is what we'll be doing is rendering with this Arnold renderer. And we're going to close that down. Now, when I delete the lights, everything switches off, but that's just because the lights are on and there is no lights. So just imagine you didn't have any lights in the world, then the world would be black. So that's what happens in 3D too. So you can just click that off if you're having trouble seeing things, but I'm just going to leave it on so that we've got all these guys on. I'll talk about those later too. The Fix Viewport puts them all on to make everything look pretty. Let's come into the light presets now in Zootools. And this creates a bunch of lights and different things. We're just going to double click this guy. It's created a bunch of lights, created some area lights and a sky dome. So let's zoom back a little bit now and we'll switch on the lights. So this is my D hotkey here. You can see now we've got these area lights here. And this is a bit of a fake lighting setup. You can't really have invisible lights in the real world, but here we have some invisible lights there. And this is our key light. And we're going to be lighting this guy. And you can see it just changes the lighting a little bit. It doesn't look amazing, but it's looking pretty decent. But we wanted to make this look much, much better. Now we've also got what's called a HDR light in the background, and this is just this factory from HDR Labs. And that just gives a little bit of reflective properties on the object. Otherwise, we would just be reflecting black onto the object here, and it gives it a little bit extra light. So that's what's been created there. And now what we can do is just close this so I can double click it and get out of the way. And now we are in the new version of Maya. So this is like new for today. You guys might be watching this in the future. 2023.2, which has this little button here now. If you're in the old stuff, you've got the Arnold renderer there, which brings up a little window and you press play. But for us now, we just hit the little A guy here. And there you go. As we say in Australia, Bob's your uncle. That means ta-da. And we can now see our little man there rendering it. It's looking loads better. So if I switch that off, we just hit the A again, and that'll switch it off. And you can see the difference in the lighting quality there. It's quite dramatic. Now, there's one extra thing I can do, and I've got shortcuts for all this stuff. Again, this is not a tutorial. Come to the systems. I've got a bunch of GPUs in my machine. They're quite old GPUs now, but I've got 4 of them, so it's equal to about a 3080. We go back to the Arnold renderer there. So I've just switched the GPU rendering mode on. And then we can enable this adaptive sampling, and we just put that actually even at 8 is probably fine. And it's just going to improve the rendering speed. So you can see that when I move, it goes a little bit dotty. That's called Monte Carlo ray tracing sampling, Monte Carlo sampling. And then it's randomly sort of like giving us these dots, and that's because, you know, the machine's really working. If you can hear it in the background, my machine is heating up because we're now making the machine work pretty hard with all the calculations that are going on. This is called rendering. But you can see now that the lighting is really soft and nice and feels very realistic, as opposed to if we switch that off, it's much faster and responsive, and this is how we animate, but the lighting here is very sharp and not quite as good now. Over time, we've got some tricks to make these viewports soft, and that's what the fixed viewport does. We've got a few other tricks to make your lighting look good in the viewport. But for now, it's sort of good to know that, you know, the viewport is sort of like a much cheaper version of rendering. It's very fast in real time. And when we hit the Arnold button, then we're going to be doing that. Now, to set a size, I'm just going to do something like square 1080p. So this is like now, actually, let's go to this one here. We'll go to set resolution 1080p HD. This is a YouTube kind of standard resolution. You can see like the standard, and we're going to be animating this guy, so we want to sort of get it roughly set up like that. I can take off this little edge here just by going toggle resolution gate off, and I'm going to go Shift K for camera, and then drag that in, and we're now looking through another camera. So we've just created another camera. I'm just going to find this guy. I'm zooming back, just going through the character there. Yeah, and we're back here somewhere a little bit in a new camera. This is now camera 1. Let's now make a longer lens. So I'll make this like 80. So we're zoomed in on him, and it flattens the image out a bit better for cartoony stuff. And we're looking pretty good there. Let's change the background color here. But before I do that, I'll just show you about lighting. Is that we saw those lights appear, but in ZooTools, we've got a whole bunch of different light presets. And if you come into the base color, this is quite interesting. Once we're rendering, you can just double click through these presets. And if I move out a little bit, we can see that it's changing the lights and positions of the lights and the colors of the lights and all this sort of stuff to give us a different effect in the viewport or in while we're rendering. Now, if I hit Alt Q, it will just deselect those lights so you can't see them. So come back to something like this, and we can see we got a very different looking light setups. And I thought I'd show you that while the background is still gray, because it shows the lights are coloring and making the background look purple when actually it's a grey shader. So it's a grey wall just with purple lights on it now. And it's kind of interesting to see that, you know, the CG scenes really do react much the same way as real life, and it's quite intuitive in that way. And this sort of lighting style is very, very similar to real world lighting. So if you're used to setting up cameras and lights in the real world studios, it's very, very similar here in 3D land. But I'm just going to come back to that default lighting setup here. And this is the one we'll build in the tutorial by hand, and we'll do it all manually in Maya rather than just the double click, which is nice and easy. I'm going to come in here. Now, I do have a hotkey for opening up some of these tools. So the shader manager, hit a hotkey then. And we're going to come in and create like kind of an orange, like here. And I'm going to type in some values because I do know the value of this. I'm going to make that 1, and this one like 0.75. And this guy can be 12. This is just because I've done it before, and we'll get a nice look without mucking around. And there we are. We've got a pretty nice looking render. I'm going to come in as a last step and just get out of that. And you can also render in the Arnold render view. So for us, that's here depending on the renderer in. We support multiple renderers, and I'm going to show you, you'd go up here in these guys to open that window. Coming in here, now this is quite a large view, so I have to sort of like zoom back. Now I can see what will actually render there. Now we can lock that so it doesn't want to dock. Just going to zoom in a little bit there, just to get him a little bit nicer in frames. And we can do a couple of last little things over here. This is like really minor because by default now Maya has a nice LUT, like a filmic LUT on by default, if you know what that means. But we can come in here and put a little bit of a tone map on, and we can do some extra stuff. So you could, you know, grade this further. I like it, and I'm just going to use that a little bit. It's really not making much difference. You can see if I really extreme that, it makes it dark. But what we can do is we can come in and add an exposure tone map, and I really should have built that one first. Just bring it up top. This UI is not the greatest. And now we can make this a little bit brighter, so we could go like 0.2, or this is really sensitive. So we go 0.5, and we're just sort of like changing the colors, and you can turn these off, and you can see it feels a little bit washed out there, but it's actually pretty good. But I could come down to this and make that like right down here, and then maybe the exposure 0.2, and we just mess with like the overall look of it. I just want that guy to be a little bit lower. So we'll just bring him down, just looking at a nice space. There, we can click this guy, that'll get rid of that. And just wait a little bit. This is the render times. So it's wanting to render, and I've set this up in the GPU mode to stop at a level of 8 in the sampling. What is that called? I forgot what it's called. The adaptive sampling, max camera AA to 8. So it will just take a little bit of time. And now that it's finished, and there we go. Now, there might be a little bit of anti-aliasing problems that you can see here, but if we go 1:1, we can see now that we're really actually, you know, got a nice clean render. And to save that out, we can go File, Save Image, and I'm just going to save this to the images folder of the Maya project that I'm in. And I'll just call this Final Render. We're going to render as a PNG. Yes, I'll just type in Arnold PNG. That's how it knows what to save. Now, there's a lot of image formats, and we're going to often be rendering an EXR file format, but for now, we can just save that as a PNG. There, and I will open that. I'm just over here, and we can go, we rendered that to images, that's where it goes by default. We've got our final render there as a PNG, and we can just have a look at it there. And remembering that that is quite a lot bigger, we're at 61%, so I can double click that, and you can see it there as we've made our little man. Now we're going to animate him in the next tutorials, but first we're going to go through and do all of that much more slowly. We're going to learn the interface. We're going to learn little bits and pieces about this. We're going to go really quite slowly and take time to build this, so you explain, so you can understand, you know, what's happening. And then we'll come in and animate this guy, and we'll do some other models after that. So this is a long course. Hopefully this is the start. It gives you a bit of an idea about Maya and 3D rendering and how it works, and we'll fill in the gaps as we go along. All right, there we go, guys. See you later.